The badge on his chest, he believed, gave him the right to be judge, jury, and executioner. Officer Greg Holloway was the kind of cop who thought he owned the streets of Pine Creek, and he had a particular hatred for outsiders who drove cars more luxurious than his own. But on a humid Tuesday in July, Holloway made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't just tag a black couple in a high-end SUV. He inadvertently declared war on two of the highest-ranking federal agents in the country. This isn't just a story about police misconduct. It's the most satisfying career ending you'll ever hear, courtesy of karma. Buckle up. The heat in Pine Creek, Alabama didn't just envelop you, it crushed you like a wet wool blanket. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, largely because there wasn't much to know. And at the center of this web was Officer Greg Holloway. Greg was 45 years old with a prominent belly and a buzz cut that reached halfway down his scalp. He wore his tight uniform, the fabric straining against a chest that hadn't seen a gym in a decade, but he made up for it with attitude. In Pine Creek, Greg wasn't just a patrolman. He was the guardian. He'd been on the force for 20 years, long enough to know which drunk drivers to take home and which ones to throw in jail. He had a reputation, one he carefully cultivated. They called him the Hammer at the local dive bar, the Rusty Nail. He liked that. Hammers smash things. It was 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Greg was parked at his usual checkpoint, a gravel turnoff tucked behind a huge billboard advertising Singleton, personal injury attorney. He was sipping warm, sweet tea, sweat beading on his upper lip, watching the interstate traffic trickle down onto Main Street. He was bored. Boredom was dangerous for a man like Greg Holloway. Boredom meant he started looking for trouble. That's when he saw it. An obsidian black Range Rover. The newest model gleamed so brightly, the sun reflected off it like a mirror. It moved slowly, respectfully, at the legal speed of 35 miles per hour. But for Greg, that was the first red flag. In his mind, no one drove at the speed limit unless they were hiding something. He squinted, leaning forward over the steering wheel. The windows were tinted dark, barely legal by Alabama standards, but he could make out silhouettes. 2 people. As the car passed his hiding place, a ray of sunlight pierced the windshield. Greg saw the driver, a black man, broad-shouldered, wearing sunglasses, one hand casually on the wheel. Beside him, a black woman looked at a phone or a map. The knot in Greg's stomach tightened. It was that familiar mix of jealousy and territorial aggression. Drug money, he thought instantly. It was a reflex, a neural pathway worn down by years of unchecked prejudice. Who else drives a $100,000 car down Pine Creek on a Tuesday? No one who works a 9 to 5 buys that. He didn't check the license plates. He didn't wait for a traffic violation. He simply shifted into gear. The gravel crunched loudly as his patrol car hit the asphalt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha," Greg mumbled into his radio, not bothering to swallow the ice in his mouth. "I'm pursuing a suspicious vehicle, black Range Rover northbound in Maine, suspected drug trafficking, 1018 Alpha." The dispatcher, Miss Higgins, answered with static. She didn't ask for probable cause. In Pine Creek, Greg's intuition was probable cause. Greg turned on his lights. No siren, just the silent threat of authority from the strobe lights. He accelerated, tailgating the Range Rover, aggressively trying to scare them. "Run," he thought. "Give me a reason." The Range Rover didn't run. It didn't swerve. The driver signaled right calmly, methodically, and pulled over onto the dusty shoulder near the old Baptist church. Greg grinned. "Gotcha." He checked his dash cam. It was on, but Greg knew the tricks. He tilted his patrol car slightly so the camera would focus on the suspect's door, but the audio could be temperamental if he needed it to be. He unbuckled his belt and adjusted his sling. He rested his hand on the grip of his Glock 17 without removing it, just so they knew it was there. He walked over to the passenger side window. He preferred the passenger side. It threw people off, made them turn their backs on him. He tapped the window with his knuckles. Bang! 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 The window rolled down silently. Inside, the air conditioning was blasting. The interior smelled of new leather and nothing else. The woman in the passenger seat turned to look at him. She had sharp, striking features, her hair pulled back in a neat professional bun, and she wore a navy blazer. She looked at him over the rims of her sunglasses. Her eyes showed not fear, but annoyance. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. Her voice was crisp, articulate, and accentless. Greg hated that tone. It sounded polite. It sounded like she thought she was better than him. "License and registration," Greg barked, ignoring her question. He leaned forward, letting his sweaty face invade her cool sanctuary. He looked past her at the driver. The driver was a human behemoth. He wore a tight gray t-shirt that revealed arms the size of tree trunks. He too was calm, unnervingly calm. "I asked you a question, ma'am," Greg said, lowering his voice an octave. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "We were going 35, the driver said. His voice was deep, a bass rumble. "The sign was up. The license plates are valid." "I pulled you over because you have an obstructed view," Greg lied. It was his usual trick. That air freshener hanging from the mirror. There was no air freshener. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, then back at Greg. "Nothing in the mirror, officer." "Don't get smart with me, kid," Greg snapped. The insult came easily, a casual show of power. "I said, license and registration now." The woman sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Terrell, give it to him. Let's get this over with." The driver, Terrell, slowly reached for the center console. "Hands!" Greg yelled, taking a step back and reaching for his gun. "I want to see hands. Put them on the dashboard now." "I'll get my wallet," Terrell said, halting his movement. "I don't know what he's reaching for," Greg shouted, performing for the unseen audience of his dash cam, setting the stage for self-defense. "Get out of the car, both of you." "Officer," the woman said, her voice turning icy, "this is unnecessary. We're complying." "Get out or I'll drag you out," Greg roared. He was escalating the situation. He wanted a reaction. He wanted them to yell back at him, to resist. That gave him permission to do what he really wanted to do, put them on the ground. Terrell looked at the woman. They exchanged a glance Greg couldn't decipher. It wasn't fear, it was silent communication. Protocol. "Okay," Terrell said. "We're out." Greg stepped back, his hand trembling on the holster. He was smiling inwardly. He had them. He was going to tear this sleek car apart, find the drugs he knew were hidden in the panels, and impound the vehicle. By tonight, he'd be the precinct's hero. He had no idea. He'd just ordered the assistant director of the Atlanta field office and a senior prosecutor from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division out of his vehicle. The heat hit Terrell and Kesha Jacobs the moment they stepped onto the gravel shoulder. It was stifling, but neither of them flinched. They stood beside the car, their hands clearly visible. "Spread out," Greg ordered. "Hands on the hood." "Am I under arrest?" Terrell asked, still not moving. "You're being held for questioning," Greg spat. "Now do as I say." Terrell placed his large hands on the hot metal of the hood. Kesha did the same. Greg moved behind Terrell. He gave Terrell a sharp kick in the ankles to spread his legs. "Wider," Greg growled. He patted down Terrell's hands, aggressively and intrusively. He checked his waistband, his pockets, the inside of his thighs. He was looking for a weapon or a pouch, something hard. He felt a hard, rectangular bulge in Terrell's back pocket. "What's this?" Greg asked, triumph rising in his throat. "It's my wallet," Terrell said. "Which contains the ID you asked for." Greg tore the wallet out. He didn't open it yet. He tossed it onto the hood of the car. He walked past Kesha. "Officer," Kesha said sharply, "I do not consent to a search. You don't have probable cause." "I do have probable cause because you're acting nervous and your partner here is combative," Greg improvised. He reached out for her. "Don't touch me," Kesha said. It wasn't a shout. It was an order. She stopped. Greg froze for a split second. "Listen to me," Greg whispered, leaning into her ear, inhaling her expensive perfume. "She's at Pine Creek now. The Constitution ends at the county line. I can do whatever I want." He grabbed her arm and spun her around. He patted her down quickly, roughly. He felt nothing on her. Frustrated, he stepped back. "Stay right there. If you move, I'll electrocute you. Do you hear me?" He walked to the driver's side door of the Range Rover. "You can't enter the vehicle without a warrant," Kesha yelled. Probable cause, Greg yelled back. I smelled marijuana. She's lying, Terrell said. Neither of you smokes. This is illegal. Tell that to the judge, Greg muttered. He lunged into the car. He rummaged through the center console. Candy, a charging cable, a pair of Ray-Bans. Nothing. He opened the glove compartment. Insurance papers. Rental agreement. Wait, rental. He checked the agreement. Hertz rented in Atlanta. Drug dealers always use rentals, he confirmed to himself. He reached under the driver's seat, his hand brushing against something cold and metallic. Bingo! Greg's heart pounded against his ribs. He pulled it out. It was a Sig Sauer P320, matte black finish, standard capacity magazine. He stumbled out of the car, holding the weapon up in the air like a trophy. Gun! He yelled. Gun on the ground! Get down! Now! He pointed his own service weapon at Terrell's chest. Terrell didn't fall. He slowly rose from the hood, turning to face Greg. His face was etched with a dark, dangerous resolve. Officer, Terrell said, his voice deathly calm. Put that gun down. That gun is legal. Get down or I'll take you down, Greg yelled, trembling now. Adrenaline surged through his system. You're under arrest for unlawful possession of a concealed weapon. It's not illegal, Kesha said, her hands still in the air, but her eyes following Greg's trigger finger. Check the wallet, officer. Open the wallet you tossed over the hood. I don't care about your fake IDs, Greg yelled. He activated his radio on his shoulder. Dispatch 1018. I need backup. I have 2 suspects at gunpoint. Weapon recovered. Send everyone. You're making a mistake that will cost you everything, Terrell said. Look at the badge next to the weapon. Greg paused. He looked at the gun in his left hand. There was a small leather holster attached to his belt that had gone missing under the seat. He hadn't taken out the holster, just the gun. Shut up, Greg yelled. Sirens wailed in the distance. The cavalry was arriving. Greg felt a surge of power. He was going to parade these two through the precinct. He'd be on the evening news. 2 more cruisers screeched to a halt behind him. Dust swirled everywhere. Officer Miller and the new warrant officer Sanders appeared. Handcuff him, Greg shouted. Resisting arrest, illegal weapon. Miller, a younger but less confident version of Greg, lunged at Terrell. He grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. Terrell didn't physically resist, but his muscles were so dense that Miller struggled to bring his wrists together. I'm a federal agent, Terrell said loudly and clearly, so the cameras in the new cars could record him. My badge is in the wallet on the hood. If you put those handcuffs on me, you're kidnapping a federal officer. Miller hesitated. He looked at Greg. Greg, what's he saying? He's lying, Greg shouted. Everyone's saying that. Handcuff him. Miller clicked the handcuffs shut. Click, click. Sanders grabbed Keisha. She allowed them to handcuff her, her eyes never leaving Greg's face. She was memorizing him. Every mole, every sweat stain, every badge number. I better check that wallet, Miller said nervously, just to be sure. Okay. Greg holstered his gun and grabbed the wallet from the hood. He opened it. He expected to see a Georgia driver's license, maybe a fake Social Security card. Instead, a gold shield gleamed in the sunlight. It was heavy, detailed. The eagle spread its wings at the top. Below, bold blue lettering was etched into the gold. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent. Greg blinked. He rubbed the badge with his thumb. He glanced at the ID card in the adjacent window. Terrell Jacobs, Special Agent in charge. Clearance level, State Secret/CI. Greg's stomach sank to the floor. The world tilted slightly on its axis. The warmth seemed to vanish, replaced by a chill that began at the base of his spine. He glanced at the second wallet. Kesha's purse was in the car. He ran to the car, grabbed her purse, and tossed it onto the seat. Another badge slid open. United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Senior Prosecutor. Greg looked up. Terrell was standing by the trunk of the cruise ship, handcuffed. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking straight at Greg. And for the first time, Greg realized that the look on Terrell's face wasn't one of anger. It was pity. Miller, Greg croaked. His throat was as dry as sand. Yes, Miller asked, gripping Terrell's arm. "Take them," Greg said, his voice trembling. He couldn't admit he'd made a mistake. Not now. Not in front of the rookie. He had to double down. They're fake. Very good forgeries. Take them." Miller looked hesitant, but followed orders. He pushed Tyrell into the back of the cruiser. As the door slammed shut, separating them, Greg stared at the gold badge on his hand. His fingers were shaking so much it almost fell off. He'd just arrested the FBI, but he didn't know half the story yet. He didn't know why they were in Pine Creek. The drive to the Pine Creek police station was short, but it felt like an eternity in the cramped back seat of the cruiser. The plexiglass divider was scratched and yellowed, a barrier between the gritty reality of the back seat and the air-conditioned authority of the front. Terrell sat hunched over. He was simply too big for the space. His knees pressed against the cage, but he didn't complain. He breathed rhythmically, a technique he'd learned during hostage negotiation training at Quantico. Beside him, Kesha stared out the window, watching the familiar landmarks of the small town pass by. The ramshackle gas station, the high school football field, the endless row of churches. Officer Miller, driving the car, kept glancing in the rearview mirror. He looked terrified. The badge's credibility evaporated with every mile. "Greg says, they're fake." Miller muttered more to himself than to anyone else. "They have to be fake. Who keeps a badge like that in a glove compartment?" "Someone who doesn't want to display it unless necessary," Terrell said from the back. His voice was deep, echoing through the partition. "Officer Miller, I want you to think very carefully about your next steps. You are currently an accomplice to a federal kidnapping. If you prosecute us, if you fingerprint us, you're cementing your role in this lawsuit." "Shut up!" Miller yelled, but his voice cracked. "No talking back there." They drove through the station's garage door. The heavy metal gate closed behind them, sealing out the sunlight. Greg Holloway was already there. He'd gone ahead, desperate to control the narrative before Terrell and Kesha arrived. He was standing by the registration counter, talking quickly to the duty sergeant, a weary man named Sergeant Ridley. "Drug dealers," Greg said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "High-grade dope, Ridley. Luxury car. Concealed weapon. Fake federal IDs. Real professional forgeries. I need them processed separately. Maximum security protocols. No calls until we verify their identities." Ridley looked up over his reading glasses, chewing on a toothpick. "Fades, Greg? You arrested feds?" "Fake feds." Greg slammed his hand on the counter. "Don't you get it? It's a cover-up. They think the badge scares us. Not me. I saw right through them." The gate opened, and Miller walked in with Terrell and Kesha. Terrell walked with his head held high, despite the handcuffs. Kesha looked like she was walking into a boardroom, not a jail. "Empty your pockets," Greg ordered, approaching them. He grabbed Terrell's arm to push him toward the counter, but it was like pushing a brick wall. Terrell didn't move until he decided to. "They have our wallets," Kesha said coldly. "They have our phones. They have our badge numbers, which, by the way, Officer Holloway, you are legally required to verify immediately by calling the Department of Justice switchboard. Do you want the number, or do you know how to use Google?" "I don't need your numbers," Greg scoffed. He leaned close to her face. "I'll arrest you as Jane Doe until you give me your real names. You'll sit in a holding cell with the junkies and prostitutes until you give in." "My name is Kesha Jacobs. I'm a senior prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division," she repeated, enunciating each syllable. "And you are currently violating Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, deprivation of rights under the color of law." Greg laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. "You memorized the code. Nice." "Give them a pat down." The room went silent. Even Miller froze. "Pardon?" Sergeant Ridley asked. "Did you hear me?" Greg said, his eyes blazing. "I suspect you're carrying narcotics internally. Standard procedure for suspected drug traffickers. Pat down. Both of you." "I'm not doing that, Greg," said the duty officer, Officer Reed, from the corner. She stood up, arms crossed. "I'm not patting down a woman in a blazer who sounds like a lawyer's because you have a hunch. This is insubordination," Greg yelled, his face turning bright red. I'm the arresting officer. I give the orders. Actually, a new voice boomed from the hall. I give the orders. Chief Bill Stagg walked into the search area. Stagg was a relic of the Old South, a man with skin as tanned as leather and a belly that hung over his belt buckle. He wasn't a good man, but he was pragmatic. He didn't like noise, and Greg was making a lot of it. "What's this circus, Holloway?" Stagg asked, eyeing the well-dressed, handcuffed couple. "Chief, I got a big one," Greg said, hurrying over. "Drug dealers, Range Rover, concealed weapon. And check this out." He tossed the badges onto the counter. "Fake federal IDs." Chief Stagg picked up the Tyrrell badge. He felt its weight. He ran his thumb over the engraving. He frowned. He'd seen fake badges before. They were usually made of cheap, lightweight metal with glued-on centers. This badge was solid brass. The enamel was flawless and had a chip embedded in the back for secure building access. Stagg looked up at Tyrrell. He glanced at the handcuffs. "Who are you?" Stagg asked quietly. "Special Agent in Charge, Tyrrell Jacobs," Tyrrell said. "FBI Atlanta Field Office. And if you don't remove these handcuffs in the next 10 seconds, Chief Stagg, I will personally see to it that this building becomes a parking lot." Stagg looked at Greg. "Have you checked the badge number?" "It's fake, Chief." "Why would I check a fake number?" Greg insisted, sweat dripping down his face. "Now check it," Stagg ordered Ridley. "I can't," Ridley said, typing on his computer. "The system's slow, but—" The chief looked at the woman's ID, Jacobs. Same last name. Stagg narrowed his eyes. "You arrested a husband and wife?" "Siblings," Kesha corrected, "and partners in the task force." "Task force?" Greg scoffed. "What task force? There isn't a task force in Pine Creek." Tyrrell smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "That's because you're the target, Holloway." The air left the room. "What did you say?" Greg whispered. "We're not just passing through," Tyrrell said, his voice dropping to a low murmur that vibrated through the room. "We've been tracking a money laundering scheme involving Singleton's personal injury firm and bribes to the local police for 3 months. We were on our way to meet with our local informant when you stopped us." Greg's face went white. "The billboard. He sat under that fence every day. He received envelopes of money from Singleton every Friday to ignore certain drunk driving tickets." "He's lying," Greg yelled. "He's trying to scare you." The chief put them in the holding cell. Chief Stagg looked at the badges. He looked at Greg, a burden he'd had on his side for too long, and then he looked at the phone on the wall. "Unhook them," Stagg said gently. "No," Greg yelled. He pulled out his taser. "Nobody touches them. They're my prey." "Greg, put the taser down," Miller yelled, drawing his own weapon. The precinct was at a standstill, cop against cop. "This is where Tyrrell said it calmly. The moment you decide how your life ends, Officer Holloway. If you taser me, I'm suing you. If you shoot me, my outside team will turn this place into Swiss cheese. Or you drop the gun and we'll talk about a plea deal." Greg's hand was shaking. He looked at the boss. The boss had turned his back on him. Greg lowered the taser. "Unhook them," Stagg repeated. Miller hurried to unhook them. Tyrrell rubbed his wrists. He didn't attack Greg. He didn't yell. He just leaned over the counter, took his phone from the plastic bin, and turned it on. "I need to make a call," Tyrrell said. "Go ahead," Stagg said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "The office line is open." "I don't need your line," Tyrrell said. He dialed a number on his cell phone. He put it on speakerphone. The room fell silent. "Ring, ring, director's office," a female voice answered. "Patricia, this is Tyrrell Jacobs, Code Red, Pine Creek, Alabama." Code Red. The voice on the other end instantly sharpened. "Status of Agent Jacobs and District Attorney Jacobs." "Sure, but we've been compromised. Local police intercepted us. They held me at gunpoint. Illegal search and seizure. Unlawful detention." "Are you safe now?" "For the moment. But I need the team. Bring everyone in. Estimated time of arrival is 12 minutes. They were waiting on the perimeter. Hold it, Tyrrell." The line went dead. Terrell looked at Greg Holloway. Greg was leaning against the filing cabinet, looking like he was about to throw up. 12 minutes, Terrell said. I suggest you start writing your resignation letter, though you won't need it where you're going. 12 minutes is a long time in a silent precinct. It's enough time to think about every mistake you've made. Greg Holloway sat down in a chair in the corner of the records room. No one was talking to him. His colleagues, Miller Reed, even old Sergeant Ridley, had unconsciously moved to the other side of the room, out of the blast radius. Terrell and Kesha sat on a metal bench, composed. Kesha had pulled a notebook from her bag and was writing furiously. Every few seconds she'd glance up at Greg and jot down a note. "What are you writing?" Greg asked, his voice a croak. "Your indictment," Kesha said without looking up. "I'll add the charge for the pat-down threat. Sexual harassment under the guise of law adds a good 5 years to the sentence." "You can't prove that," Greg muttered. "It's my word against yours." "Indeed," Officer Reed chimed in. "I'll testify about it." Greg's head snapped around. "Reed, you'd rat out a brother." "You're not a brother, Greg," Reed said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're a bully, and you nearly killed us all today. I'm not going to jail for you." "Traitors!" Greg spat. "All of you!" Suddenly the coffee in the mug on Sergeant Ridley's desk rippled. A low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards. It started softly, like distant thunder, and grew louder. "What's that?" Miller went to the window. "Helicopter," Stagg said, staring at the floor. "State police." Then came the sirens. Not the wail of a single cruiser, but a cacophony. It sounded like an invasion. Tires squealed outside. Doors slammed shut. Many doors. "Open the door!" A voice amplified by a loudspeaker boomed from outside the access corridor. "This is the FBI. Open the door immediately, or we will force our way in." Sergeant Ridley fumbled for the button. He pressed it. The heavy metal door rose. The sunlight that flooded the interior was blinding, but the silhouettes that rose within it were terrifying. 6 men in full tactical gear carrying AR-15S Advanced Information. On their chests, bold yellow letters, FBI. Behind them walked a woman in an elegant gray suit, flanked by 2 state troopers. It was Assistant Director Margaret Hale. She looked like she ate nails for breakfast. "Secure the room," shouted the lead tactical officer. The team burst in. "Hands! Let me see your hands." Every officer from the Pine Creek precinct, Stagg, Miller, Reed, Ridley, raised their hands. Even Greg. The tactical team moved with fluid precision. They bypassed the locals and went straight to Terrell and Kesha. "So, ma'am, are you hurt?" the lead agent asked, lowering his weapon but keeping his eyes scanning the room. "We're fine, Agent Rostova," Terrell said, standing and dusting his pants. "The situation is under control." Assistant Director Hale entered the room. She surveyed the scene with an expression of utter disgust. She locked eyes with Chief Stagg. "Who's in charge here?" she demanded. I am," Stagg stammered. "Chief Bill Stagg." "Chief Stagg," Hale said, stepping into his personal space. "You are relieved of command. Effective immediately. The Alabama State Bureau of Investigation is taking over this precinct. This is now a federal crime scene." "Under what pretext?" Stagg tried to muster some authority. "Under the pretext that your department runs a protection racket for the Singleton law firm," Terrell interrupted. "We have the wiretaps, Bill. We have the bank records. We know about the bribes. We know about the planted evidence." Terrell turned his gaze to Greg. "And we know about Officer Holloway's enforcement techniques." Hale turned to look at Greg. "Is this him?" he asked. "It's him," Kesha said, standing up. She pointed a manicured finger at Greg. "Officer Greg Holloway." He initiated the arrest without probable cause, assaulted a federal officer, filed a false report, attempted an illegal search, and brandished a taser at detained suspects. Hale nodded. He gestured to the tactical team. "Hook him up." 2 agents grabbed Greg. They didn't do it gently. They spread his legs and slammed him against the wall, mimicking exactly what he'd done to Terrell an hour earlier. "Hey, watch your shoulder," Greg yelled. You have the right to remain silent, Agent Rostova recited, tightening the zip ties until they bit into Greg's wrists. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. This is a mistake, Greg shouted as they dragged him toward the door. I was just doing my job. You look suspicious. It was a good arrest. Terrell approached Greg as they dragged him out. He bent down. You wanted to find drugs in my car, Greg? Terrell asked gently. You wanted to be a hero? Well, you'll be famous. You'll be the face of police corruption in the state of Alabama. Fuck you, Greg spat. Terrell wiped a speck of saliva from his cheek. He didn't blink. Get him out of here, Terrell said. As Greg was shoved into the back of a black federal SUV, a cage much smaller and darker than his own patrol car, he saw them. The media, news vans were arriving. CNN, Fox News, local affiliates. The FBI didn't just bring guns, they brought the spotlight. The story of a corrupt small-town cop arresting the FBI was too good to pass up. Back inside, the precinct was being stripped. Agents were seizing computers. Files were being packed away. Chief Stagg sat in a chair, his head in his hands as the state trooper read him his rights. Keisha walked over to the registration counter and picked up her badge. She clipped it to her belt. She looked at Terrell. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, Terrell said. He picked up his own badge. But we're not done. Holloway is just the muscle. We need Singleton, and we need the judge who approves these fake warrants. Singleton's in his office, Kesha said, checking her phone. B-Team is storming his office right now. Good, Terrell said. He looked at Officer Reed and Rookie Sanders, who were standing in a corner, terrified. Terrell walked over to them. They flinched. Relax, Terrell said. I know who the bad apples are. So do you. You just stood there. That's not good, but it's not criminal yet. He handed Reed a business card. If you want to keep your badges, you're going to tell us everything. Every bribe you took, every time Stagg looked the other way. Talk, you go free. Stay silent, you go down with them. Reed took the card. His hands were shaking. I'll talk. I'll tell you everything. Good choice, Terrell said. He turned toward the door. Come on, Kesha. Let's get our car back. I think Officer Holloway left it unlocked. As they walked out of the precinct into the humid Alabama afternoon, the cameras flashed. Terrell didn't smile. This wasn't a victory lap. It was just the beginning of the cleanup. But for Greg Holloway, staring through the tinted window of the federal transport, his life as he knew it had effectively ended. He just didn't know how bad it was going to get inside. The federal courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, was a stark contrast to the damp, dusty streets of Pine Creek. It was a fortress of marble and glass, heated to about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But for Greg Holloway, sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit 2 sizes too small, it felt like an oven. It had been 3 months since his arrest. 3 months sitting in a federal detention center, denied bail because he was considered a flight risk and a danger to the community. The irony didn't go unnoticed by anyone, except perhaps by Greg, who was still wallowing in a deep pit of self-pity. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was taken. In the front row sat Terrell and Keisha Jacobs, impeccably dressed in tailored suits. They weren't just witnesses. They were the architects of Greg's downfall. Behind them, the national press. The story had gone viral. The dashcam footage, the very footage Greg had hoped to use to incriminate them, had been leaked. YouTube had it. Twitter had it. Millions had seen Greg Holloway taunt a decorated federal agent. Don't get smart with me, kid. The comments section was a graveyard of Greg's reputation. He was the most hated man in America. Everyone stand, announced the usher. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Vance entered. She was known as the scalpel for her skill in cutting through legal nonsense. She didn't tolerate theatrics. Greg's attorney was a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Finch. Greg had tried to hire Singleton, the personal injury lawyer he had protected for years, but Singleton wasn't returning his calls. Mr. Finch, said Judge Vance, adjusting her glasses, we're here for the suppression hearing. You're arguing that the dashcam footage should be inadmissible. Yes, Your Honor, Finch said, sweating. My client is arguing that the audio was altered, that he never used racial slurs, that Officer Jacobs provoked the confrontation to entrap a local officer. Judge Vance looked over her glasses at the prosecution desk. Kesha Jacobs stood up. She wasn't prosecuting this particular case. It would be a conflict of interest, but she was assisting District Attorney David Ross. "Your Honor," Ross said, rising to his feet, "we have the SD card metadata. We have independent verification from the FBI's Digital Crime Lab, and we have a surprise witness who can testify to the authenticity of Mr. Holloway's behavior." Greg frowned. "Witness? Who?" "Call Arthur Singleton to the stand," Ross said. Greg's heart stopped. Singleton. The back doors opened, and Arthur Singleton walked in. He no longer looked like the confident lawyer from the billboards. He looked shrunken. He was wearing a listening device that had been removed, but he was clearly cooperating. He avoided looking at Greg altogether. Singleton took the stand. He was sworn in. "Mr. Singleton," Ross began, "do you know the defendant?" "Yes," Singleton said quietly. "That's Greg Holloway. He was on my payroll for 7 years. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Greg gripped the table. "Rat! Filthy rat!" "And why was I paying Mr. Holloway?" Ross asked. "To target outsiders," Singleton admitted, his voice trembling. "Specifically people driving expensive cars who seemed to have insurance. I'd pull them over, harass them, maybe even beat them up. Then I'd send a henchman to the jail to offer them my legal services to sue the city. We'd settle out of court, and Greg and I would split the settlement money. It was a spin and burn scam." "And did Mr. Holloway have any preferences about whom he targeted?" Ross asked. Singleton hesitated. Then he glanced at Tyrell Jacobs in the front row. "He targeted black drivers," Singleton whispered. "He said they were easier to scare. He said the juries in Pine Creek wouldn't believe them before they believed a white cop." The courtroom erupted. Judge Vance banged her gavel, her face a mask of fury. "Order! Order in this court!" Blood drained from Greg's face. It wasn't just a botched arrest anymore. It was a conspiracy. It was a hate crime. It was systemic corruption. "Mr. Finch!" Greg's lawyer glared at Greg in disgust. He didn't even bother to question Singleton. He knew the ship had sunk. Then came the key. Ross played the video again on the giant monitors. "We'd like to replay the moment of the arrest one more time, focusing specifically on the defendant's reaction to the plates." The video played. The sound of Greg yelling, "Gun!" filled the courtroom. Then silence. Then came Terrell's voice, calm and authoritative, and finally Greg's face, widening and brightening as he saw the FBI credentials. The fear in his eyes wasn't the fear of a man in danger. It was the fear of a bully who'd gotten into a fight with a lion. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Vance said, looking directly at Greg, "I've seen enough. The motion to suppress is denied. The evidence stands, and frankly, if I were you, I'd start praying for a plea deal because a jury will bury you." Greg looked at Terrell. Terrell offered a small, polite nod. It was the ultimate power move. He wasn't angry anymore. He was simply efficient. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later was a formality. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Deprivation of rights under the guise of law, conspiracy to commit extortion, filing false police reports, assaulting a federal officer. Judge Vance didn't hold back. "Greg Holloway, you have dishonored the uniform you wore. You have used the power of the state as a weapon of terror against innocent citizens. You have not only broken the law, you have broken the public trust. I sentence you to 25 years in a federal correctional institution without the possibility of parole." 25 years. Greg would be 70 when he got out. If he got out. He was processed outside the county jail and put on a bus, a Con Air bus. He was shackled hand and foot, chained to his seat. The other prisoners on the bus stared at him. They saw the soft hands, the terrified eyes. They smelled the cop in him. "Fresh meat," whispered a tattooed man 2 rows back. They arrived at FCY Talladega, a medium-security federal prison. It wasn't the white-collar camp Greg had fantasized about. Because of the charges of violence and using a weapon, he was placed in the general population. The intake process was a nightmare. They stripped him naked, ironically, the same thing he'd tried to do to Kesha. They sprayed him for lice. They gave him a uniform that smelled of industrial detergent and stale sweat. "Name," barked the guard. He was a young black man, no older than Officer Sanders at Pine Creek. "Greg Halloway," Greg mumbled. "I was a cop. I need protective custody." "They can't put me in the general population." The guard looked up. He recognized the name. They all did. "Protective custody is full," the guard said impassively. "Besides, CP is for people in danger. You're a tough guy, aren't you?" "The hammer," Greg shuddered. "Please, they'll kill me." "Keep your head down and your mouth shut," the guard said, handing him a thin roll of mattress. "D-block, move it!" D-block was a cacophony of noises, shouts, metal clanging against metal, the blare of televisions. As Greg walked down the corridor, the noise lessened. Heads turned, eyes fixed on him. News travels fast in prison. They knew who he was. They knew what he'd done. He reached his cell. It was a 6-by-8-foot concrete box. His cellmate was already there, doing push-ups on the floor. He was a massive man with a shaved head and Aryan Brotherhood tattoos covering his arms. Greg hesitated in the doorway. "Maybe this is okay," he thought. "Maybe the white gangs will protect me." The cellmate stopped doing push-ups. He stood up, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He looked Greg up and down. "Are you the cop?" the cellmate asked. "X," Greg quickly corrected. "I was framed, just like you guys." The cellmate laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. "We don't like cops around here," the man said. "But we don't especially like the cops you see on the news. You bring trouble. You bring lockdowns." "I can pay," Greg said desperately. "I have money stashed away." "Your money's gone, Halloway," a voice came from the catwalk. Greg turned. Standing on the bars of his cell was a group of 3 inmates. One of them was Latino, small, but with shark-like eyes. "We saw the news," the Latino inmate said. "The feds took everything. Your house, your truck, your pension. You have nothing left." Greg sank into his bunk. It was true. The civil forfeiture laws, the same laws he used to steal money from drug dealers, had been used against him. Terrell and Kesha had filed a civil suit along with the criminal case. They had stripped him of everything. "So," his cellmate said, cracking his knuckles, "you're broke, you're a cop, and you're famous. That's a bad combination, Greg." That first night, the lights went out at 10 p.m. It was pitch black. Greg lay on his bunk, staring at the concrete ceiling. He could hear the breathing of the man beneath him. He could hear shouts from the corridor below. "Hey, Officer Halloway! Arrest me right now!" Someone yelled into the darkness. Laughter echoed through the block. Greg closed his eyes and saw the Range Rover. He saw the sun glinting off the black paint. He saw Terrell's calm face. "Why didn't I just let them go?" he thought. "Why did I have to be the big man?" Regret is a bitter pill, but in prison, it's the only medicine you get. The next morning, Greg went to the cafeteria for breakfast. He tried to sit alone. He set down his tray, watery oatmeal, and a hard biscuit. He felt a shadow fall over him. He looked up. It wasn't an inmate. It was the warden. "Halloween," the warden said. "Yes, sir." Greg stood up, habit taking over. "You have a visitor." A visitor. Greg's heart leaped. Maybe a lawyer, maybe an appeal. "Legal visitor," the warden said. "Follow me." Greg was led into a private room. He went in expecting to see Mr. Finch. Instead, sitting at the metal table, looking relaxed and healthy, was Tyrell Jacobs. Greg stopped. The guard closed the door behind him. "What are you doing here?" Greg asked, his voice trembling. "I promised you I'd see it through to the end," Tyrell said. He didn't seem angry. He looked at Greg the way one might look at a specimen in a jar. "I wanted to see if the system worked." "You ruined my life," Greg whispered. "No, Greg," Tyrell said firmly. "You ruined your life. I only turned on the lights. You were the one in the dark doing dirty things." Tyrell slid a piece of paper across the table. "What's this?" Greg asked. "It's a letter," Tyrell replied. "From the Department of Justice. We're offering you a deal, a reduction in your sentence. Greg's eyes widened in surprise. What? Because Singleton was just the middleman, Tyr said, leaning forward. We want the judge. We want the mayor. We want the whole network in Pine Creek. You know where the bodies are buried, Greg. You were the one handling the money. Greg looked at the document. If he talked, he could shave 10 years off his sentence. He could be transferred to a more secure prison, but if he talked, he'd be a snitch, and snitches in prison. If I talk, Greg said, feeling sweat bead on his lip, they'll kill me in here. And if you don't talk, Tyrell retorted, standing and buttoning his suit jacket, you'll rot in here for 25 years. And from what I saw in the cafeteria, I don't think you'll last 25 months. Tyrell banged on the door to summon the guard. Think about it, Greg. You have 24 hours. The offer expires when I get back to Atlanta. Tyr left. Greg was alone in the room with the paper. The choice was his. Be a rat and live in fear, or be a convict and die there. He looked at the signature line on the document. United States of America versus Gregory Halloway. He picked up the pen. The pen felt heavy in Greg Halloway's hand, heavier than his service weapon ever had. He stared at the plea agreement on the metal table in the prison visiting room. The whir of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound, an exasperating murmur that seemed to drill into his skull. Snitch. The word echoed in his mind. In the culture of the Pine Creek Police Department, being a rat was worse than being a criminal. But as Greg sat there, shivering in his ill-fitting prison jumpsuit, a bitter realization finally dawned on him. Where was Chief Stagg, retired with a full pension before the indictments, or so he hoped? Where was Mayor Donovan, probably playing golf at the country club, pleading ignorance? Where was Singleton, singing like a bird to save his own skin? Loyalty was a lie. It was a currency the rich used to buy the silence of the poor. Greg had been the loyal soldier his whole life, the hammer that crushed anyone who threatened the status quo. And what did he have to prove it? A cell 2 by 2 meters and a terrifying cellmate from the Aryan Brotherhood who wanted him dead. Greg uncapped the pen. Fuck it, he whispered into the empty room. If I'm going down, I'm taking this whole damn town down with me. He signed his name, Gregory A. Halloway. The ink wasn't even dry when he slammed the door. Oh my God, I'm done. Bring Agent Jacobs back here. 3 days later, the storm Tyre Jacobs had promised finally rolled into Pine Creek. But this wasn't just rain. It was a hurricane of federal indictments. It began at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning. The town was waking up, the coffee boiling in the cafeteria, the school buses idling. A convoy of black SUVs, unmarked vans, and armored trucks traveled down Main Street. This time, they didn't stop at the police station. They went straight to the top. Target 1, the courthouse. FBI agents stormed Judge Roy Abernathy's chambers. Abernathy, a man who had sat on the bench for 30 years, signing blank orders for Greg Halloway to fill out later, was dragged out in his pajamas. He was found shredding documents in his office. The image of the distinguished judge in a silk robe being handcuffed on his lawn was broadcast live by news helicopters. Target 2, City Hall. Mayor Frank Donovan was in the middle of a televised press conference denying any knowledge of the corruption when Tyrell Jacobs stormed the stage. Mayor Donovan, Tyrell said, his voice booming without a microphone. Federal order. Donovan froze. You can't do this here. I'm the mayor. You're a blackmailer. Tyrell corrected him. We have the ledger, Frank. Greg gave us the ledger, the kickbacks from the construction contracts, the payments from the impound lot, the cut you took from every deal Singleton made. It's over. Kesha Jacobs stepped forward and handcuffed the mayor. Press cameras flashed like lightning. It was the perfect picture, the corrupt establishment falling before the very justice they had tried to pervert. Target 3, the remnants throughout the city. The pieces fell into place. The tow truck owner who charged exorbitant fees and split them with the police was arrested. The doctor who falsified sobriety tests was arrested. Officer Miller, who had simply stood by and watched, turned himself in, tears streaming down his face, begging for mercy. By noon, Pine Creek's power structure had been decapitated. The network of old friends wasn't just broken, it was pulverized. 6 months later, Greg Holloway sat in a sterile recreation room at a federal correctional institution in West Virginia. He'd been transferred. Witness protection for prisoners was a solitary existence. He was in a unit with other snitches, mobsters who had testified for the state, gang leaders who had betrayed their lieutenants. There was no status here, no gavel. He was just inmate 894. He was sweeping the floor, a job that paid 12 cents an hour. On the wall, a television was showing the news. Greg stopped sweeping. On the screen, a ceremony in Washington, D.C. The Attorney General was standing at a podium. Behind him stood Tyrell and Kesha Jacobs, honored for their extraordinary courage and dedication to the rule of law. The Attorney General said, "Special Agent Tyrell Jacobs and Lead Prosecutor Kesha Jacobs are receiving the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award. Their work in dismantling systemic corruption in Alabama has become a model for civil rights enforcement across the nation." The camera zoomed in on Tyrell. He looked strong, stoic. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a victor. Greg leaned on the handle of his broom. He felt a strange emotion. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even jealousy. It was resignation. He remembered the moment on the side of the road, the heat, the arrogance, the feeling of being a god in his own little kingdom. I picked the wrong fight, Greg thought. I saw a black man in a nice car, and I saw a criminal. I should have seen a king. "Hey, Holloway, move it!" a guard yelled. "The floor isn't going to sweep itself." "Yeah, boss," Greg muttered. He glanced down at the linoleum and kept sweeping. The dust clouds came and went, going nowhere, just like him. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Tyrell and Kesha left the Justice Department building. The ceremony was over. They had their medals in their velvet cases, but they weren't wearing them. They walked to the parking garage. Their car was waiting for them. A new one. A dark blue SUV. Government-provided bulletproof glass. "Do you think he's watching?" Kesha asked, tossing her purse onto the back seat. "Greg?" Tyrell paused, his hand on the door handle. "Yeah, I think so. He's got plenty of time to watch TV where he is." "Do you feel bad for him?" Kesha asked. Tyrell looked at her. He thought about the years of terror Greg had inflicted on people who didn't have a badge to protect them. He thought about the parents separated from their children, the careers ruined by trumped-up charges, the fear in the eyes of the community. "No," Tyrell said simply. "He got exactly what he asked for. We just delivered it." He got into the car. The engine roared to life smoothly. "Where do we go now?" Kesha asked, fastening her seatbelt. "I heard there's a sheriff in Mississippi who thinks he can seize voting machines." Tyrell smiled. He started the car. "Let's go say hello," he said. The SUV pulled out of the dark garage and into the bright, dazzling light of the late afternoon sun. They were hunters now, but they weren't hunting for sport. They were hunting for justice, and business was good. And this is the story of how Officer Greg Holloway learned the hardest lesson of his life. He thought his badge made him untouchable. He thought his bias was patriotism, but he forgot that in the United States of America, no one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it. Greg is currently serving the second year of a reduced 15-year sentence. He lost his pension, his family, and his freedom. Tyrell and Kesha Jacobs continue to serve at the highest levels of the federal government, reminding corrupt officials everywhere that you never know who's behind the tinted windows of the car you just pulled over. Karma isn't just a concept. Sometimes it's a federal agent with a warrant. If you enjoyed this tale of instant karma and justice served, please smash that like button. Do it for Tyrell and Kesha. What would you do if you were in Tyrell's shoes? Would you have kept your cool or exploded? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, where the bad guys get exactly what they deserve, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and remember, check your bias before it checks you. See you in the next one.